the time has come for us to start this event. I want to welcome you to this Women in Governance event. My name is Caroline Kotze. I am the founder and Chief Equity Officer at Women in Governance, and it's an immense pleasure for me to be here with you today. I sit on the boards of the Quebec Labour Council, the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, Alexa Translations, and of course, Women in Governance. The question of more women on boards has been one top of mind for me for, I would say, a good 15 years, and that's why I founded Women in Governance in 2010. So it is my utmost pleasure to welcome all our guests from the four corners of the planet, just like our panelists that I cannot wait to introduce to you. This event is part of a 4-workshop series, part of our global mentoring programs. And if you'd like to know more about these programs, please go on womeningovernance.org/mentoring, but not now, after the event. And so after the event, there will be breakout rooms for our mentors and our mentees to have more in-depth conversations and discussions on what we will be talking about here today. So I will have the privilege of moderating about 35 minutes of discussion with our 4 panelists. And then my colleague, Nicole Piggott, will do a 15-minute Q&A from the public. So please get your questions ready, put them in the chat, and hopefully we'll get to yours. So without further ado, allow me to introduce you our distinguished panelists. I will start with Catherine Barba. She is based in Paris. She is a board member at Renault Group, Etam Group, and the France-US Chamber of Commerce in New York. Then we have Anne Cairns, who is based in London. She's the Executive Vice Chair of Mastercard, Global Chair of the 30% Club, Chair of the Financial Alliance for Women, and former Chair of ICE Clear Europe. Mariah Morris is based in New York. She's a board member at Wells Fargo, a board member and audit committee chair at S&P Global. And also in New York, we have Sheila Stamps, who is a board member at IQVIA Holdings, Pitney Bowes, MFA Financial, and board member and audit committee chair at Atlas Air Worldwide Holdings. Ladies, welcome. And thank you so much for being here, for your generosity, because we all know how busy you are, and making time to share your insights, your knowledge, your experience with women and men who are interested to learn more about your journey and the ways that you have been able to overcome certain obstacles, and also what you have brought to the boards that you have joined. And I'd like to begin with that. I would like to start with sort of the business case of why more diversity on boards. What do we feel as women or as members of underrepresented groups we bring to boards? And I'll start with you, Catherine, because your answer was quite, well, out of the ordinary, I guess. You're not looking at your value add from the male-female perspective. You're looking at your value add from what you have to bring to a board like anybody else.
Absolutely.
I'd love to hear you about that.
Sure. But I'm sure I'm not the only one to think that. I am not a woman on board. I am an entrepreneur on board, which makes totally the difference. I think the value I bring to the board is not related to my gender, but it's related to what I know, to my personality, to my experience, to my background. And what I bring definitely is I am an entrepreneur, international from the digital world. So basically to a group like Renault or Etam, that's definitely what I bring. So I do not consider myself, I don't know about you ladies, but I do not consider myself as a woman on board, but entrepreneur on board.
And your knowledge as an entrepreneur, your also good knowledge of the tech ecosystem, your international experience, all these are definitely things that are very needed on any board. And you were talking about the value of diversity from a risk management perspective. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, first of all, I'm sure that we all feel that we're contributing to the board because of who we are. But the real truth is that in many parts of the world, women aren't represented very well on boards, and certainly Black women and Black people aren't well represented on boards. And that's an issue, because really what you have then is companies being run at the top by a group of people that only represent one part of the population. And we're not in the era of shareholder management, we're in the era of stakeholder management. And that means that companies have to think about reflecting the employees who work for them, the customers they serve, and the wider societies that they take part in, because you can't be successful in a failing world. And to that point, there's a lot of research that shows women are not risk averse, but actually we're quite thoughtful risk takers. And there's certainly data that shows that boards that have more of a mix in terms of gender and mix in terms of backgrounds and different experience of people are better at assimilating risks. And my goodness, we live in a risk environment now. We have war in Europe, we're just coming through COVID, we've got climate change to face. So now is the time that we really need resilience and diverse boards.
And you were also mentioning our capacity for conflict resolution.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, this is another thing, I've mentioned war in Europe, and actually there's data out there that shows, as far as political leaders are concerned, peace agreements negotiated by women appear to last longer. And women have an affiliative management style in general in the corporate world, which causes us to manage through conflicts in a different way, in a non-confrontational way. I'm not saying that's true of every single woman. I mean, we're people, of course, your gender doesn't define you completely, but again, there are traits and there are trends about how people behave.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've grown up in the Lebanese Civil War, so definitely I believe that it would have been shorter had we had women at the negotiation table. Maria, you talk of diversity on boards from the social, professional, and cognitive aspects. Can you expand on that?
Sure. I certainly believe that women on boards, people of color on boards, all different types of diversity are important, but also cognitively, people that think differently. And I think this goes back a little bit to what Catherine was saying, which is she's a woman, but she also brings a set of expertise to the table. She brings a different cognitive approach to the way that she thinks about problems and solving problems. And going a little bit back to what Anne was saying on the social side, connecting people and having people that are able to do that. Some of that's gender related, some of that's diversity of experience, some of that's diversity in terms of the professional backgrounds we've each had. So I really am a huge fan, as Anne just said, on really ensuring that we have gender diversity, that we have diversity of people of color, and really thinking about our stakeholders and representing them, but it's not enough, frankly. And boards need to think about diversity from a much broader perspective, so that the culture in the boardroom really represents what the stakeholders need it to represent, and that decision-making is really done with the group and really benefiting from everybody in the room.
Definitely the stakeholder versus shareholder comment resonated with me as well. Maria, you were mentioning if we want to win and keep top talent, that's a consideration, and especially I'm guessing Europe is the same, but in North America, we are really hit hard by the talent shortage. So do you feel that this is also something where boards can make a difference?
Absolutely. And interestingly, I think we all have been speaking during this month on International Women's Month to the management teams of the boards we serve on and other management teams. And I mean, to a team, people have reached out afterward to say, seeing women on our board makes the difference for us. And we talk about that with our own teams. We're able to attract people we wouldn't attract because they're seeing people like themselves at the board level. And frankly, I think we just ask better questions. So, when an opening is available at the C-suite or C-suite -1, and it's a white male, we'll ask the question, who else is out there? Who else have we looked at? If we're not nurturing different types of talent, how do we get those programs so that we nurture in-house?
Very interesting. Sheila, so we ask Is it better questions? It's at least different questions. So the different perspectives on a problem, finding different solutions. How important is our contribution?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I agree with my colleagues. I think very much you have to understand the value that you bring to the board, but also as a woman, I know that I am a woman on the board. I bring a different perspective. And as an African-American woman, I bring a different perspective than a number of my colleagues here at the table. So, you know, when I was thinking about diversity on boards, and I'll just touch on this briefly, you know, demographics are changing. And I think the thing I would like to leave everyone with is that more and more progressive boards and progressive companies are realizing that diversity is not a choice. It's not an elective. It is something that is required today. If you are going to build a sustainable company, then you need to have a board that is representative of your customers, reflective of your workforce, so that you can understand what the market looks like and the market forces are going forward. I hate to use the word future proofing your company, because obviously that's a tech term, but it's the truth. If you are going to grow and sustain yourself in this new demographic area where the millennials want to see a different type of workforce, then you need to have the voices at the table that will help you accomplish this.
So Sheila, we often hear people saying we would love to have women on our boards, but we can't find them. I'm sure you also hear we'd love to have people of color on our boards, but we can't find them. What do you answer to that?
Well, I first started to say, why aren't you looking? Because we are there. And they need to broaden their resources. There are a number of boutique firms out there that have inroads into the different communities that they're looking for, right? There's the Executive Leadership Conference. You know, there are tons of places to go look for Black executives. And I think early on, it would be like, they're not CEOs, or we can't find the people that have run companies. That's changed since when I started looking for boards. It's still a fallback, but now with the expertise that people need in different areas, that should no longer be a barrier. You need to go and look for the expertise that you need, and there are plenty of places out there to find it. And I would be delighted to help them look.
Do you all have a list of women in your pocket? If anybody says they're looking,
absolutely.
Just pull it out.
Absolutely, we've got. I mean, it's amazing that even in today's world, they're saying we can't find the women or the Black people. Are we hiding? Are we hiding in plain sight? That's ridiculous.
We have always been hiding in plain sight. They just need to look for us.
But, you know, I actually had a conversation when I was in Japan with some of the guys that said that to me then. And I said, okay, whose mother is a woman? Whose sister is a woman? Who went to business school with women's? Who have got women customers? Who, you know, and I said, you know, there are plenty that you know. Just look, just
well, that's so interesting, the women customers, because the reality is we're 51% of the population. We're 60% of university graduates. We're actually 80% of buying decision-making. Mm-hmm. So how can a company that is actually selling goods or products or services to mainly women find that the perspective of a woman on the board doesn't have value? So I just want to go back to one of the comments Sheila was making about the P&L experience, because we've been hearing a lot of that, right? Well, we need CEOs or former CEOs while they're still the white men. And you mentioned that you've been at some point questioned about your own P&L experience when you had more than enough.
Yes, I mean, that's quite funny. When I went for a FTSE 100 board, I had been a banker for over 20 years, and I was being interviewed by the chap who ran the audit committee, and he actually asked me, can you read a balance sheet? I went like, what have I been doing at Citibank? I don't know. But this is the kind of thing that happens in interviews, that women get questioned about, you know, really simple things like that. You know, they're actually questioning your skills sometimes. And that's a long time since that's happened to me, because I've been at sort of exco level in a company for a long time. But, and I can see Sheila and Maria and Catherine laughing at this, but it really is laughable, isn't it, that would happen to you?
I'm only laughing because something similar happened to me. I get the question of, do you really have enough bandwidth to do this? And I usually sit back and say, okay, so you're running a company, you're on 5 boards, I'm not. So when you turn that question around, it makes people think, well, why am I asking her that question?
I have to say, I was really fortunate. I've not had it happen to me directly, but one thing I would say, especially for younger women, is the way that we write up our bios, the way that we write up our CVs is important. You know, I was running 60% of MetLife, but that had to be clear because the title didn't necessarily say that. And so I think one of the things about women, sometimes we're not as quick to kind of put the facts out, you know, and we need to do that. We're running big P&Ls. We have to be able to show our span of control. And so that if someone asks you after seeing that, then we really have a problem.
And
I'm loving this conversation.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted
sorry,
to
I just wanted to say, go ahead, Sheila.
I'm sorry. The one thing I wanted to add to that is, yes, on your resume, put that experience, but don't be afraid to also put down experiences that you gained outside of the office, because that also gives you a different perspective and more diversity to bring to the table. Sorry, Caroline, it's all yours.
No,
now.
that is so important, Sheila, what you just said. And that brings me to the fact that so many women are hesitant to talk about their achievements. They feel that they can come across as arrogant. When a man does it, we're all, you know, admiring him. So I think that's really important. The unconscious bias and the stereotypes are still alive and kicking. Catherine, you had interesting thoughts about stereotypes. You said they are there, but I don't care. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, just like you, I'm a free woman, right? And when I was a total rookie 5 years ago, it was my very first board with Renault, and I had absolutely no idea why they chose me and why I was there, but it was exciting. And I knew I had to bring something and I had to learn. So it was a good match, right? And the first time, and I swear it's true, the first time I entered the boardroom, there was another woman starting at the same time. And I heard one of the guys around the table, very famous here in France, he said, oh, he was laughing, right? He said, now that we have the women, we can go and get talents. Can you believe that? And I was like, what? I've been working for 25 years in the tech industry, where, you know, we know that, you know, there is no balance. I mean, it's obviously a very male environment, but never, ever had I heard such, you know, a quote. So I thought to myself, what should I do? Should I laugh? Should I cry? But the thing is, I just thought, wow, this is really about stereotypes. You know, stereotypes are so persistent, but really, I decided not to care about this. I don't know how you would have reacted to that, but I was like, I'm going to prove you, my friend, that I'm worth being here. And it was just a bad joke, right? So yeah, stereotypes are here. And I believe that diversity is when, you know, it's very uncomfortable at the end of the day. We love the idea of diversity, but living it is really uncomfortable. So I love when it's uncomfortable, because it means that we are innovating.
Yes, it means change is happening. So have any of you ladies experienced being the first woman on a board, talking about uncomfortable situations? And did anybody live that? Be the only woman?
Yeah, well, I was.
Oh, that's good news.
On my first not-for-profit board, actually, and sadly on my first government board, yes. And it's, I wouldn't say I was dramatically uncomfortable, because most of my working life I've been the only woman. So, you know, a bit like Catherine, who's in a very male industry, I'm kind of used to it. What I don't like is, you know, the kind of comments that you've had to face, Catherine. And I think that it does make you pause and think, but I think that it's more of a bad reflection on the person saying it than it is on you. And I think what I've found about being in a room and being the only woman, if someone behaves like that, the other men feel uncomfortable and embarrassed, and they should, by the way.
Yeah, and we should encourage them to say something, actually, not have to necessarily be the ones defending the other women or ourselves. So we were talking about helping other women, and to me, that is just so key. There are certain obstacles that women tend to face. And first of all, before we dive into what can we do collectively to help other women, what can women do to help themselves? Sheila, I'm just curious, as a African-American woman, do you feel that there was an added obstacle compared to a white woman to get to the level that you got? And you've got some pretty impressive boards. So that kind of reassures me that we are getting there. But did you perceive added obstacles along the way?
Well, absolutely. When the push for gender diversification started, most of the boards sought to fill the quotas, the slots, or what have you, and it was primarily with Caucasian women. And if they felt that, and I'm glad that they're adding diversity, they would probably opt for an African-American male over an African-American woman, because then they only had to have the color area, right? Not both gender and color. So it was quite challenging. And the other thing was, I was not that CEO type, right? So that's one of the reasons why I tout network so much, and why I talk a lot about having a diverse network. And you talk about giving back. Well, I was on a venture fund working with female entrepreneurs. And so I not only invested in them, I mentored them, et cetera. And in that giving back, that's where I got my first opportunity for a board. It was 10 years prior that someone remembered I wanted to be on a board. So that woman introduced me to a woman who ran her own search firm, who introduced me to a male CEO, but still got me in the door that way. So yes, it really was a hurdle, and I overcame it through my network, not because one of the big four called me up.
Right, so network is key. You talked about a male CEO, so there are female allies, there are male allies, and at the end of the day, in the US, Fortune 500, 8% of female CEOs. So we certainly cannot turn our backs. We need to work at it together. Maria, you've spoken more than once in your in our prep session about helping other women and younger women as well. There are things that can be done maybe sooner, and to ensure we have the appropriate talent and diversity. But there was one thing that I thought really interesting was about the skills and competency assessments and matrices that board are using more and more. How can that help more women get on boards?
Yeah, as Sheila was talking, I was thinking about that, because I think a few years ago, I joined my first board about 6 years ago, and some of this was going on, but I think in the last 2 or 3 years, boards are really recognizing they need a set of skills, going back to what Anne was saying earlier. And more of them, when they have openings, are looking at the capabilities and competencies that they need and doing really thorough work around the capabilities. My advice for anybody that's looking to be on a board is read proxies. You're going to get a very good feel for how the board governance works and how the nominating and governance committee looks at the capabilities and competencies that are needed on the board based on the industry, based on the problems and issues facing the company, et cetera. And I think it's helping us, because if you think about what we talked about earlier, where all stakeholder management matters, things like human resources, a lot of women have been senior in human resources, and that was not considered a background that was very board ready. But all of a sudden, now that employee and the war for talent and stakeholder management becomes much more important, having an HR or CHRO background is going to be very helpful. Anne talked about risk management. There are so many people. I'm an insurance executive, so I lived risk. And so my risk management prowess was one of the reasons I believe I'm on the Wells Fargo board and now chair the risk committee there. You can think about things like stakeholder relations, investor relations. There's so many areas now where the capabilities that we have are going to be important to boards. But first, you need to know what your capabilities are. You need to be able to, if you're in your 30s and early 40s, really ask for those roles that are going to round you out in ways that get you ready. And a lot of people say, did you think about being on a board when you were in your 30s or 40s? I can't say I did, but I did want a rounded experience. And I wanted to do a lot of different roles, which then set me up to do that. So I'd say when we talk about helping women, I mentor a lot of women and men, frankly, but a lot of it's around getting their mindset to, if you really do want to do a board, how do you go about doing it? And I'm sure my colleagues have some ideas and I can pop back in if needed.
Well, the career management piece of it all is crucial. And you've had an interesting career from engineering to investment banking to Mastercard. Can you tell us sort of how you've achieved all that?
Well, I mean, my first career as an engineer, that was straight out of university, and I went to work as a research scientist, and it was a wonderful sort of 9 years of my life, but the company was nationalizing, the company was privatizing. It was a nationalized industry, British Gas. And I saw that all the people rising to the top weren't the engineers, they were finance types. And I thought, oh gosh, I better go do an MBA. And then Citibank advertised in the paper saying they wanted people who were managers to come in and retrain to be investment bankers. And that's how I joined banking. And I found I loved banking, actually. And I joined in October 1987. 3 weeks later, Black Monday, the whole stock market crashed around the world. My timing was excellent, I have to say. And then, I became a fantastic expert in restructuring. As a result, 20 years later, I became the CEO of Lehman Holdings during Chapter 11 in London and was unwinding their swaps portfolio across the world. So never, what do they say? Always use a crisis to your benefit. But,
yes, never waste a crisis.
Never waste a crisis. That's what we're looking for. But I think in respect of boards, I'm going to go back to something that Sheila said, because often to get your first board seat, what you need is a network out there. And you can build that network actually in your day job by basically networking with people from around your industry. I got on the board of a mortgage bank as my first board in the UK. I met the chairman at cocktails. And he said, we've got a prepaid card business. I'm not quite sure what to do with it. You seem like an expert in this. And the rest is history. Because, as Maria said, they're looking for specific skills. And as Catherine said, they're not looking at you saying, oh, she's a woman, let's bring her on our board. They're looking at you as a person and saying, gosh, she knows all about this kind of area. And this is a big thing for our company. And let's bring her on the board. So actually, it's quite a, I would say networking's the number one thing. And then, of course, you get experience. I wanted to just mention, sorry to hog, but I wanted to mention that inside Mastercard, I sponsor a program called Boards for Impact, where we set something up. We matched our women with NGO boards. And the reason I mention this with networking is often when you go onto an NGO board, you meet CEOs and people from all sorts of different walks of life, different companies, and they help you get your PLC board. That was so successful. We then did it for our Black employees in America. You know what? That was even more successful. There was more demand. Now we've taken it to the UK and we're opening it in Latin America as I speak. This is fantastic for our executives because not only are they gaining wonderful networks, but also they're really broadening their skills. When they're younger, as Maria said, she wasn't thinking of going on a board then, but actually it's a good time to be thinking in your 30s and 40s about the skills that you need for the future. And I think Sheila said earlier, the things that you do outside your board are perhaps equally important when you're trying to present yourself as a person.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's interesting because we're talking about the importance of networking internally, networking externally. And as we've just spent 2 years behind our screens, there's a new ceiling that's creeping up on us after that, you know, famous glass ceiling. We're now talking about a Zoom ceiling because people are going back into the office. And I do say into the office, not back to work, because we've been working more than ever, I think, the past 2 years. And, you know, I do see a danger from the fact that maybe women will decide that they want to benefit from this added flexibility of staying home part-time or even more. But do we feel that, you know, the men who will be spending more time in the office together, will the old boys club maybe get back stronger than before? And will some important decisions be made without the women in the room because they're just behind the Zoom screen? And when the laptops close, then the important conversations take place. I'm a little bit concerned. And I just want to say one thing to companies. And when they're doing their performance evaluations, do not evaluate FaceTime, evaluate the output, the content of the work, because the women are doing their work in a different manner, but the output is just as excellent. But I'd love to hear you, ladies, on that. It wasn't on the script, but I think it's very important at this stage of the pandemic.
Well, you know,
Sheila?
when I think about what you just said, I think it's even more important that the boards be involved, and they are becoming much more involved in culture and setting key performance indicators. Compensation committees are awarding people and incenting the behaviors that they want to have. So I think it's important for boards to be even more in touch about what's happening in the human resource talent management area. Because as I said before, this is not an elective. This is something that needs to happen. And you are not going to attract and retain talent if people don't feel that they can blossom in your environment. And so I think the board diversity, even more critical now in that particular factor, and that will keep people from falling back into that old board network.
Diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice.
Right. Yeah. And to add what Sheila was saying, future-proofing the board, I think the board has to help future-proof the environment that we come back into. And my boards are spending time on the workplace and what the workplace is going to look like as we come back to work. And to your point, not back to work, but back to office. And I think there's a lot of work to be done across the globe on what interaction needs to look like. We all just need to ensure that the diversity aspects of that get taken into consideration.
Catherine, you mentioned something earlier, which kind of puzzled me when you said, I had no idea why they chose me. So you must surely know that it's got to do with all the wonderful things that you've accomplished, but how did they hear of you? Because we're talking about networking, we're talking about, you know, having our list of women in our pocket, getting women more privy to proxy reports, etc. But how did they tap you on the shoulder? How did that happen?
Exactly. Yeah, I had no plan at all to join a board. It was not my objective. I had no idea I could do it, by the way. I was, you know, great world and the startup world is two different worlds. So I could not think that someone with my background and profile could, you know, be identified by such a huge company as Renault. So really, I did not network. I have to say, I was just working a lot, just like you, but I was making my skills very visible. I mean, like you, I'm active on LinkedIn, on Twitter. I don't know how you guys shared with the world what you know, just how you post articles. So my two legs are, on the one hand, everything related to e-commerce, to innovation transformation, and on the other hand, it's everything about diversity and inclusion. So on both topics, I've always been very visible, writing books, or like you also do, or organizing, hosting events, posting messages, including people. So I believe networking can definitely help a lot, but if you want to be chosen or, by a great group to join a board, I believe you have to make your skills visible. So that was not my plan, but I wanted to share, that's what I say to my daughter. If you want to get things, first you have to give. So, and I was giving time and expertise. And so I guess that's how they came to me.
But that's very interesting. So it's your personal branding. It's all the work that you've done, not necessarily with that purpose, but it served you. Yeah. Do you ladies have interesting stories about personal branding or ways that you were able to showcase your interests? Because that's the other thing. There are a lot of women who say, I want to sit on a board, but they're not saying it to the right people.
I have one, and I think Sheila could probably join me on this. We're both on the Women's Forum of New York, and we've had a CEO initiative going on since 2011. And in 2014, we started a CEO board ready database, which encouraged CEOs to actually put up women either on their teams or in their network that they believe were board ready. And when I joined S&P Global, there was a number of reasons. I was still a C-suite executive and would be for 2 years after joining S&P Global. But there was a reason that I got on that board. There was 3 or 4 reasons. Network, I knew the CEO, but the CEO checked the database with the Women's Forum and saw that my CEO had put me as board ready. So I think there's a lot of different ways to connect the dots. Obviously, the networking is very important, but just getting out and saying, I'm ready, and asking if you're in a company, asking your CEO if they would support you in joining a board. I think to Anne's point, it can be an NGO to start with, but then over time, if your company does enable you to do public boards and the CEO is comfortable, join the Women's Forum of New York database or others like that. And that database is available free to all of the headhunting firms, to nom and gov committees. So I think more of that will help us going forward.
It will certainly help with a question about how they can't find people. But
we're still worrying about that, Sheila. Very worried.
No, I agree with that. From my perspective, I sit on the NACD New York chapter board. I was also at one point in time on the faculty of NACD as well. So, just getting out things like that, like you're doing with women in governance from a mentoring standpoint. But to a point that Maria mentioned about getting on boards when you're a senior executive, until you ask the question, you don't know whether or not your company will support you doing that. So when you're a senior executive and you feel that you have an interest in getting on a board, enlist your CEO or your mentor to help you get on that first board while you're working. Because the argument there is not that only that you will get the experience, but you can bring back so much more board-related experience to your company. So ask the question, ladies. Let's do that.
That is brilliant, brilliant. And obviously you mentioned our mentoring programs. This is global. So whether you're in Paris and London, in New York, in Montreal, in Toronto, you can join the mentoring program and be matched with a top board member, board chair, a CEO who can help you achieve your goals. And we also offer in French only right now. So if you're in Paris, you can join governance training programs so that women are more than ready. So this is all the time that I have with you. Unfortunately, ladies, I need to give room to my colleague, Nicole Piggott, who is the Chief Operating Officer. She will be doing the question and answers from the public. Nicole sits on the boards of, she's the Vice Chair of the Black Academic Scholarship Fund. She chairs Impact. She's a board member of the National Safety Council and on Women in Governance Board, of course. Nicole, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Caroline. Actually, it was such a rich conversation. You've covered some of the topics, but there's been a wild submission of questions. So the first question I have for you, and not for anyone specifically, is we're seeing women are at about 50% on not-for-profit boards, but they're still struggling to make that transition from not-for-profit boards to corporate boards. Do you have any advice as to how we translate all that rich expertise we're seeing with women on not-for-profit boards into for-profit boards, and frankly, the bigger not-for-profits where women are still struggling to get a seat?
You know, I'll kick off the conversation. I think it goes back to something that Maria, and maybe all of us have said, is learn to translate those skills, the skills that you have there and the experience that you're getting on the board into your board profile and into your networking conversation. You have to let people know where you want to go and what you want to do. And if you have a company that you're interested in or an industry that you're interested in and you're reading the proxies, you know what skills they need. You can speak to those and you gain them in the office and you also gain them in the NGOs. So that's how I would kick off the conversation.
I think Anne mentioned this.
Sorry, go on, Marie.
I said you had mentioned this earlier too. When you're on a nonprofit board, you want to go to something that speaks to your passion. Obviously, that's why you're doing it, but also look for who the other board members are, because the other board members become part of your network and they're also very helpful. I can't tell you how many times I've had people from NGOs that I sit on come to me and say, can we have a coffee? I'd like to think about public boards. How did you do that? And then I could be references for them because I've seen them in the boardroom.
Great, that's great advice. Anne, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Maria and Sheila, and I think the thing is that on your not-for-profit boards, and if you're on a big one, the chances are you're on with several other CEOs. I was just talking to a colleague of mine today who was actually sitting on a board with several CEOs, and she'd gone into the boardroom and went, oh my God, how do I add value here? This was in an NGO. But if you think about it, CEOs are constantly thinking about their own boards and looking for talent. And of course, the more that she did for that particular NGO, and she did a fantastic restructuring program for them, the better that she'll be reflected with those people she's working with.
This is great advice. So ladies, listen up. So the second question we have here is, are there any elements of the board recruitment process that you found surprising or frustrating?
Okay, I'll kick it off again. It wasn't surprising, or it wasn't necessarily surprising or frustrating, but I will tell you, when you're working to get that first board, at least for me, it took a while. And when I went through that interview process the first time, I liken it to going through a gauntlet. I interviewed with every person on the board, not because I was the first woman, but because it was my first board, because I felt it, because I wasn't a CEO. They wanted to make sure not only if there was fit, but that I was bringing the skills to the table that they needed. So be appropriately patient with the process. That's advice I would give. And if you know your value and you know what you bring to the board, make sure that you can relate that to them. And when you're going through the interview process, realize you're being interviewed, but you are also interviewing them. Because when you get on the first board or any board, it is very important for you to be able to work hand in hand with the people you're sitting around the table with.
I love that piece of advice because, you know, the other thing is, if you think of it as a two-way street, that you're interviewing them, it makes you more relaxed. It makes you have a more adult to adult conversation, which is really what you should be having in the boardroom anyway. And I think that you just interview better.
I love the way you characterize that, both of you, because it's this sense of mutuality. We don't want to be supplicants coming to the table as if we're begging someone to accept us. And Catherine, you started out by saying, you know, I deserve to be here. You know, they are gaining from my being here. And I think we have to make sure as women that we don't forget that they are gaining from what you bring to the table. Maria, this is a good segue into a question that came to us about reading proxies. You had mentioned, you know, the value of reading proxies to prepare. Can you just expand a little bit on that? Just
Sure.
How you do that? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think actually it's interesting because the conversation we were just having on culture you can get that from the proxy as well, because really when you're reading a proxy, you're going to read about the company's values. You're going to read around how the board is structured, what the committees are, what's important, and the capabilities of the board, et cetera. So I find reading proxies just helpful to understand when I'm interviewing a company to see if it's a good fit for me. Do I get enough information from the proxy to help me understand the culture of that company? And I think we've talked about the boardroom and being comfortable in the boardroom. I also look to understand who the CEO is. Not to say the CEO is going to be there forever, but the CEO is setting a tone for the management team. And so oftentimes, when you read the public documents, even press releases of companies that you're interested in, you're going to get a better feel for the culture of the company that can help you understand somewhat the culture of the board as well.
Right. It's great advice. Catherine, you mentioned something at the very beginning of, and we came back to it at the end about being surprised that you got the tap on the shoulder. You kind of explained it through your visibility and your personal branding. But did you feel a sense of, we often hear this term imposter syndrome attributed to women as we break through ceilings. Did you struggle with that? Like, how did you overcome that sort of feeling like, why am I here? How did I get here? In those first few moments of being on the board, in those first few board meetings?
I'm hardly intimidated. Because I think really it doesn't matter that much. I want to learn and I love discovering things. And as everyone said here, you also bring your value. You know what you know. So if you're here, it's a good match for everyone. So I never, I was always comfortable. The only thing that was surprising to me when I started is that the onboarding was like, there was no real onboarding. I had to discover the whole thing myself. I was not prepared for that. So what I decided to do was to go to every single female director around the table, to establish emotional connection, to bond with them, and to sit with them, have breakfast, I don't know, just to learn about them. And that made me feel like, we are family. We're not just around the table trying to make very important decisions, but, we are a team, and that helped me tremendously.
That's really interesting. Maria, Sheila, and Anne, interested to hear about your first board experiences and maybe that sort of awkward transition. You're both breaking through a glass ceiling. You're in often cases you're under scrutiny. How did you transition and continue to deliver impact in that context? Because that's the things that women are dealing with that men often take for granted.
Well, I think Catherine actually put it very nicely. I think that the social side of it is really important on a board. Mm-hmm. And you should take the time to get to know your other fellow board members. Actually, to Maria's point about reading the proxy, you should read the CVs of the board members. And to Sheila's point, you're interviewing them and just decide, are these people you want to be spending some time with? Because actually, boards can be quite intense. When I joined the board of AstraZeneca, Pfizer came in to do a hostile takeover. And as a result, I think we had like 19 board meetings in the first few months because we were meeting every weekend, and talking several times a week about what was happening. And you become, in that particular process, you became very close to your other board members. You really knew who they were. In other cases where you don't have that kind of, crisis environment, actually taking time to say, do you want to have a coffee or stay for lunch and all of these things that we haven't done very much on Zoom. I actually went into London last night and went to a not-for-profit board that I'm on currently for multiple sclerosis, just to meet some of the other board members because I felt it was important to have a cup of tea with them.
Excellent. I think we're all missing it too with Zoom. It's a lot of our boards actually would get together for dinner or just separately a night before, come in a day early, et cetera. And I think that served us really well for the 2 years that we've been on Zoom. But I think we're all craving the ability to reconnect.
Absolutely. You mentioned something about, arriving in a crisis, and often women are brought in when there is a crisis and frankly, underrepresented groups tend to be brought in when there is a crisis to probably deal with the issues and the fallout. The question I have for you all is, how do you balance family commitments, other commitments that you have in your lives, and the demands of a job and board responsibilities? I mean, that is a juggling act. And let's not joke, let's not kid ourselves. Women still do carry a big part of the burden of family care. So, question about that.
Maybe I'll start. I think, first of all, understanding just how much bandwidth and time you have is important. And I was a little slower. I was still a C-suite executive when I joined my first board. I didn't take on additional board responsibilities until I retired from my C-suite job. But I was on nonprofit boards and I wasn't chairing committees. So I really, once I got into the ability to have more time, I could become a committee chair. I could join additional boards, but really tried to gauge just how much time it would take. One way to look at it is, how many board meetings do you have? Because you need a lot of prep time to be ready for a board meeting. How many committees are you going to be on? Do you want to chair a committee? That's another whole level of commitment. And I think just like women do every day, it's really gauging the number of hours you need to be successful, and then just ensuring that you just don't overbook yourselves too early until you understand the true level of commitment.
Right.
Nicole, I wanted to react to your previous comments. I mean, you said, if you care the burden of the family care as a woman, well, I would say change your partner. I mean, this is not normal. It has to be balanced, right? So,
I love that, Catherine, because I've got to tell you, I've got a partner who knew very early on in our relationship, you'll be carrying 50 and in many cases 70% of the burden. I mean, I traveled all over the world with my job, and so you're so right. So ladies out there, and men, step up.
Right. That's a good thing. And then maybe the good thing, I mean, in my case, I don't need much sleep. I mean, I just sleep like 5 hours a night, which is not enough, I know, but that's how I try to, I'm starting my fourth venture shortly, and I have the boards, but just one child, which is already a lot. It's a teenager, but she's a teenager. But yeah, you can do it. You'll manage to do it.
The key is you can do it.
Nicole, I think I became a mother when I was 37 and got married when I was 19. It wasn't a shotgun wedding. And the thing is that I found that after I became a mother, I was much better at time management, because I knew, I wanted to get home and see my child some evenings. And I would actually be very clear in my own mind how I would structure my work. And I became much more empathetic to people as well. I was a better manager. Right. I wasn't a board member at that stage. I became board member in my 50s. So my daughter was getting more grown up then. But right. that deciding on your priorities and understanding how to manage your time, that stays with you for the rest of your life. And I think that's how you do the juggling act. Now at this age, with COVID and everything, my mother's in her 90s. So, you still have caring responsibilities when your kids are grown up. It isn't necessarily because you're a woman. My husband does a lot too. Right. But it is just a fact of life. And sometimes in the middle of life, you have both children and your parents. And that becomes a bit of a juggling act.
Well, what I'm hearing is that it's doable. Ladies,
it is very doable.
Thank you so much.
If you remember what is essential, what really matters, which means
absolutely
your job, but your family, giving back to the community, of course, and your internal life, your spiritual life. That
absolutely matters. It's important. Be a whole person. So on that, I am going to pass the closing remarks over to my colleague Monique Leroux, who she herself is an absolutely outstanding example of leadership, feminine leadership. She's a board member and governance committee chair at BCE Bell, board member and ECG committee chair at Michelin, and board member at S&P Global, Couche-Tard and Landman, and as well as our co-chair at Women in Governance. So Monique, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you, ladies. We had a fantastic time listening to you. In my view, in different ways, you are a role model and you are so inspirational, and was able to really connect to so many things that you said. Let me start with you, Anne, because you said that you started as an engineer, after that going in finance. Well, I started in music and arts, going later on in accounting and finance. So, you know, we can do so many things at one point in time that we are not anticipating when we start. Second, I guess that, Catherine, you said that one important thing sometimes is to be well supported at home, and that you have somebody, your spouse, being very supportive. I have also this privilege, and without the support of Mark, I don't think that I would have been able to do all the things I did. Sheila, so impressive in your professional and personal journey. So many things that we can learn from you. So thank you so much. And Maria, of course, I know you quite well. We served together at S&P. And Maria is a great chair of the audit committee, but much more than that, she's the one who is able to connect sometimes all those important relationships that we have around boards. Let me share a little bit my own experience. I started, in fact, to be involved as a board member when I was about 35, going into NGOs, essentially. And the reason is that they needed to have my specific expertise as a CPA, as an accountant. And it was a very nice way, building also on a comment that Catherine mentioned, that sometimes you need to contribute first before receiving. And in that context, sometimes you can start to get involved at the level of boards when you can contribute something. My second experience was as an executive. I was able to go to corporate boards, again, based on a specific expertise in accounting. So you need to be, going back to what you said, ladies, is that you need to know well what is your core expertise and skills, making sure to provide visibility about those skills that you have. And naturally, experience will build one after the other, and building networks, building relationships. My own experience is that all the boards that I've been involved still today are connected to personal connections to different people that I had the pleasure or the privilege to work with. So don't forget that, you know, building good connections with people, solid relationship will bring you to something, and be proactive, a little bit ambitious, and visible. That's the best way that you can achieve, I guess, your own objectives. So I will conclude saying to Caroline and Nicole and to the team of Women in Governance, a big thank you for allowing all of us to have this fantastic panel. Thank you, ladies, for all the sharing of your life and your expertise and your experience. And let's get connected with the fantastic network of Women in Governance. Merci beaucoup, Caroline. Thank you to all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. And just bear with us just 1 second, last little items that I want to share. Of course, Monique, thank you so much. Aren't we lucky to have her as our board co-chair? We feel privileged every day. Very lucky to have had you here today. Nicole, thank you so much for taking the questions from the public. You did an amazing job. I just want to also take a minute, if we could put up the slides, to thank our partners who've made this event possible. Thinking of cybersecurity partner Bradley and Rollins, of course, the Women's Forum, the International Women's Forum in New York, and other top chapters in the world, the 30% Club, the Corim, Air Canada, Avano Cambridge, La Presse, the Globe and Mail, and our parity certification partners, as well as our governance training partners. And I just want to also encourage you to join our newsletter. Go on womeningovernance.org. If you don't already have that, you will be informed of our next events. And the next one is on April 27th. If we could go to the next slide, please. We will have our Parity Forum, and these organizations will come together to talk about what they've done to close the gender gap in the workplace with the support of Women in Governance. So April 27th, Parity Forum, and May 24th, we've got a gala to honor all these organizations, their CEOs, their board chairs, their board members, executives will join us at the Ritz-Carlton in Toronto, and on September 15th at Palais des Congrès de Montréal. And last little item is on June 14th, we've got a Women in STEM event with some stellar women who are joining us, and that will be presented by Sun Life. That's it for us. We've got the breakout rooms for the mentors and the mentees, facilitated by Laure Cohen-Van Delft. Thank you all. Thank you for your presence, and see you real soon.